Is it really? I see a lot more crypto. I feel like there's a lot of payments. I feel like there's a lot of crypto, but I think it's also. I mean, are we live? Yeah. We're doing it.
Yep, we're live.
We're testing. We're testing.
Hey,
everyone. If you're listening out there, we are seeing if the microphones are working. I think we're live on Twitter. We're live on YouTube. Cool. Yeah, we see it. All right, everyone. Appreciate you joining us. We're here live at Money 2020 in Amsterdam. I'm joined by Jon Farjo, Chief Product Officer at Lunar Crush, joined by my main man, Marshall Hayner, CEO of We Are Metallicus, at We Are Metallicus. How you doing, man?
It's very good. It's very good. Wild couple of days. Every time we come to 2020, everything goes up behind us in a wake.
It's like you were just saying, we kind of rolled into this, but so much action over the last 48 hours. It's also interesting, we're based on the West Coast. Like a lot of times, I know you're in Los Angeles now, or in around the area, around the West Coast. It's kind of interesting being a couple hours ahead and seeing the timing. You're like awake for all this, and then you see kind of the East Coast wake up and go, "Oh my gosh, what's happening?" West Coast wakes up and they're like, "Holy cow, what's happening?" It's just the news is just kind of hitting us. We've got Coinbase with the filing from the SEC. I mean, Binance, US, Binance. There's a lot that's happening there. We saw this morning, Robinhood is even taking steps to kind of delist some of the cryptocurrencies that were listed in these suits. I mean, what's your take just on initial feedback on what is this going to mean? Maybe some of your why is some of this happening? I mean, you've been around for a really long time. I love your kind of feedback on all of it.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, you're right. It's funny. We're usually asleep when we're getting this news here in Amsterdam, so we get a little sneak preview as opposed to when we're in California. This is not a huge surprise to us, Metallicus, and to myself. What's happening in the industry? We go through these cycles where there's like innovation cycles, new blockchains, new projects launching, and there's hype cycles where crypto's cool and then it's not cool. And we're in the not cool phase. Well, not cool where people say, "Oh, crypto isn't that dead," because we go through that. Every 3 years or so, there's like a mushroom cloud on CoinDesk and says Bitcoin is dead ? And that's the running joke. Yeah. And so this next cycle is what I've been talking about is the age of regulation. I've been saying it for a long time. I think people thought maybe a few years ago it was crazy to say that we'd have digital identity on decentralized systems. On decentralized exchanges would ultimately have identity and things like that. These were unpopular ideas a few years ago. And now I read a tweet where somebody went into breaking down the centralized exchange model and Binance and Coinbase and said, I predict that we'll have a big push towards regulation technology that keeps us sovereign and keeps our ownerships of coins in non-custodial environments and things like that, and moving into that direction. And then simultaneously, we're going to see a big narrative around banking, crypto banking, banks coming in, as other players may be going out. And this might be lights out for some of these guys, right? The Binance news, that looks really bad. And, I've been saying that I saw some of this stuff coming for a while. I've been speaking up about it more and more. But, at the same time, on the regulation side, it feels that there's a fight internally. Because you also have something that's kind of going on, and I guess we can just say it now because it's all pretty out in the open. It's a very political thing now, the blue versus red, Republicans and Democrats, and where they sit when it comes to crypto. We have a Democratic financial services committee, and so while we have that, you're going to see a very bearish stance on crypto at the government level. Maybe that changes in the future, but because of that, you're seeing Elizabeth Warren, you're seeing Brad Sherman come out, and this is the guy who, doesn't know the difference between Bitcoin and a quote mongoose coin, and these are the people that are supposed to be regulating. So they don't understand, they don't get it, and they don't want it. And it's very clear I think a statement from Chairman Gensler who said, "Well, don't we already have currencies?" Yeah, we do, and we use those too. But we also want Bitcoin. We also want other cryptos, and that's millions of Americans have spoken. There's 300 million people in the U.S., and I think at least 20 or 30 million people have access and exposure to crypto. So 10% or so of Americans, that's significant. You can't. It's like Pandora's box. It's like the electric car. There is no going back at this point.
Why do you think that's my question? Why do you think there's such a disconnect there between if the constituents want it and the voter, right? You that there wouldn't be this disconnect because I know you're right. Traditionally, it's if even in Congress, if one side starts to like something, the other side, even if they don't know anything about it, instantly starts to not like that thing, right? But there's so many different people, and there's millions. I mean, in the U.S., millions of Americans that have wallets, right? And they like whether they're investing in these things or whether they're utilizing them for payments or whether it's an API and Rails, whether they're owning a Top Shot NFT, right? Like these different blockchains and the innovation that's there, it doesn't make sense that there's such pushback from both sides when you think, hey, there's enough people on both sides that own these things that participate in this market. Why do you think that they're just not seeing that?
I think you see it, and I think that's why it's become a congressional issue, and that's why Congress is having hearings about it, bringing in expert witnesses. It's kind of ironic, right, that the same platform that the U.S. government is using to sell the seized crypto is the same platform they're attacking, right? So it's that seems very strange to me.
And if you guys don't know what Mark's saying, the U.S. government, I think it's the Silk Road.
Yeah. Well, it's not just that. There's multiple.
There's other seizures that happen. So there's a lot of 10,000 Bitcoin that were sold through Coinbase, and same people that they got the Wells notice, and now they're going. The SEC is going after it. It's a little hypocrisy. It feels like
it's like that meme with the stick where you put the wheel on the bike and you go, "Who did this?" But it's you, right? So I think in America we've spoken. Americans have spoken. We want crypto, and I think there's a lot of fear around this market growing. When I first got involved in crypto, nobody cared because I won't say nobody cared, but nobody really took it seriously in the very beginning. It was very much the nerd hobby, and now it's a topic of national security, of changing the way that money works. And I started this. I think I was wearing this shirt after. No, it was a different one. In my original Metallicus video when we started the company, and I said, in the future, every company will have a blockchain. Every brand and interaction will have some sort of loyalty and tokenization rewards, and those will start to become open source. And I think at the time, this is 2016, so this is 7 years ago. People thought, well, that's kind of crazy. But the following year, we saw the big explosion when people realized, you're telling me there's something other than Bitcoin. So people start to explore other aspects of cryptocurrency. That's when Ethereum became very big, smart contracts and DAOs, and we've just barely scratched the surface. So I think when it comes to digital currency, on the political spectrum, on the left side, it's clear that they don't. I wouldn't say that they all don't want it, but it has become a polarized issue, right? And that is very unfortunate because the vision that we don't want cryptocurrency or we feel more protected to have our access limited. That's actually a very anti-American stance, in my opinion, because America is it's the land of the free, land of the brave. We want this opportunity. It's also the land of opportunity. You've heard that before. So why would we limit? Also, the home of Silicon Valley. Why would we limit cryptocurrency? And so I never really used to consider myself a very political guy, but I have done some lobbying work. I have done some work on behalf of crypto and things that I believe in. And so when it comes to what we're seeing, people really need to start voting, with their wallet, so to speak. If you work in the cryptocurrency industry, then you need to be on Twitter following the congressmen, congresswomen, senators, and elected officials who are supporting crypto, and you need to throw your weight behind them. And this is a message that Brian Armstrong's been giving, and it's spot on. And unfortunately, I think it's really the next election is going to hinge around that. And here's my big prediction: whoever really backs crypto is going to get a huge boost, because it's not just this technology; it's this idea of freedom, and people don't want to be have, to be treaded upon, right? Especially those in cryptocurrency. There was an ethos that came out of that, out of the kind of the early cypherpunk movement, and that vision of self sovereignty is very American in my mind. So, given everything that's happened in the world and the direction that we're heading, I think the next presidential election, the candidate who focuses on freedom, focuses on American ideals, and kind of getting back to taking care of ourselves and less of focusing on all these other problems that are not our main problems as a country. And now I'm getting kind of maybe a little nationalistic, but I think that it's good. And I think that cryptocurrency really will completely change the internet. I think that many people have looked at it from the outside and said, well, they're trying to solve problems that don't exist. And certainly there are people that will show up in new areas of technology, and you see it now in AI, where all these people are jumping into AI. So when blockchain's hot, people come in. But the people like us, like Lunar Crush, Metallicus, Coinbase, companies that are building to the bear and to the bull, these are true believers in the space. And I think that in terms of American innovation, we have to keep this in Silicon Valley, and we have to push forward. And so, fortunately or unfortunately, there's some polarization, and I think we're about to get a lot of clarity. Even though some regulators say there is already clarity. Well, if everyone's screaming fire, there's a fire somewhere, right? And that's the reality.
I want to read you a couple of headlines that are trending on lunarcrush.com right now. One is Nike's .swoosh is bringing Polygon NFTs to EA Sports. Another is BBC Studios and Reality Plus will take Doctor Who to the Sandbox metaverse. What are companies like this supposed to do in this environment when Polygon is specifically called a security by the SEC? What is a company like Nike supposed to do in this environment?
I think that cryptocurrency is about the permissionless nature of a decentralized ledger. It's the ability for anyone to participate. So if you think about what the internet did for information, it made it free and open. So you used to have to kind of go to the library. You have to order a book. It would come from far away. Maybe a book was banned. You couldn't get it. But when the internet appeared, information started to flow and become free. If you think about things that are fundamental human rights, access to clean water, access now to information, and now in 2023, access to cryptocurrency and blockchain, which essentially gives you the capability to bank and to transact. And sadly, in many parts of the world, in the underbanked, but also those that are the under-identified, can't access this. And I watched congressional testimony where an expert witness would say, "Well, I tried to send some USDC with my MetaMask, and the Ethereum fee was $20 on sending $5. Have you tried Proton blockchain? You could send 50 million for $0 or a fraction, 1/5 of a penny." So that technology does exist. It's just we're so early to it that that not everybody knows that. So they may only know Bitcoin, or they may only know the early kind of Ethereum wallets. They may not know about Metal blockchain, Proton blockchain, some of the newer technologies. And these blockchains that were named in the suit are all building novel and new and interesting stuff. Cryptocurrency is a global phenomenon. So in my opinion, what's going to happen is it's going to come here to Europe. Right now we're in Europe, Money 2020 Europe. And the European Union has taken a very progressive stance towards crypto. They have created a comprehensive digital assets framework, something we've been asking for in the United States, but we haven't gotten. And MiCA it does everything from digital securities to digital commodities, stable coins, everything is classified. So, typically the U.S. leads policy. They'll make a lot of policy, and a lot of the Western world will follow it. And I thought for a while that the U.S. might be leading that, but I now feel that Europe is going to lead that, and most likely the U.S. will follow Europe. That's my prediction here.
You feel the energy here.
You can feel the energy.
It's a different vibe.
It's a different vibe. It's almost like we're unaffected by everything else that's going on.
We talked about that coming here. I mean, you're seeing advertisements in the airport for decentralized exchanges, and it just looks normal. And you feel like, oh, when you get off the plane here, suddenly you're like living in. That should be the feeling when you get to the United States. Right? But you're saying Europe is leading that now. And I want to kind of get both you guys' opinion on this, where, I was talking to a lifetime politician who spent many years in government and is now, lobbying in DC. And their question back to me was, why did you guys call it cryptocurrency? Could you have called it anything else, right? Like, why did you have to use the word currency? And I was like, well, what does that have to do with the technology? And so I think it's interesting because, when you see the SEC tweeting out, a really badly created Canva image, right? Yeah, of like something. It's like I feel like you see Coinbase like kind of like clapping back today and yesterday with these really well done videos that look like they were kind of already been worked on, right?
Yeah.
And so you almost have like they're trying to sway public opinion versus saying, hey, if I have a closed door, open and shut case, like why not just go and prove that case out, right? Why kind of fight this public opinion? Just like, hey, why did you call it currency? Is there like nothing here potentially? Is this just public opinion and they're saying, hey, we're trying to? It seems like they're just trying to kind of injure versus kill off what's happening.
Well, I think there are some points that they make, right? But at the same time, to say that the 1933 Securities Act covers everything that's happening in the digital asset world is just false. Because the thing is that what didn't exist in 1933? The internet.
Everything.
A lot of things. I think
everything that we're talking about.
What were people driving then? The Ford Model T? Like, I don't know. Maybe that was a few generations earlier, 10 years earlier. But things have changed a lot, and I think that's just disingenuous for the agency to say that it applies, that you can replicate that, because you can't. Because digital assets what the former chairman of the SEC said, they can Dale Hinman, they can transmogrify. So security can become a commodity, and a commodity can become a security. You don't really see that in the traditional securities world. Security would stay a security. It doesn't usually become a commodity. But in the digital asset world, things become more decentralized over time. That's how it works. So Bitcoin is probably one of the most decentralized cryptocurrencies because it is the oldest. And then when you look at other old cryptocurrencies, Dogecoin, Litecoin, decentralization happens over time. It doesn't happen overnight.
And utility is added, right?
Yeah.
Even look at Bitcoin with BRC20 and ordinals, right?
Yeah.
Utility continues, right? It's not, and we talk about like Polygon and Matic, and we're talking about Reddit using NFTs. Like, there's nothing in the Securities Act that talks about using a fiber optic cable, and connecting to the internet to do trading cards on a social media platform that millions of people use in multiple jurisdictions across the planet. It's not covered anywhere. And so they're just trying to put a square peg into a round hole. And you'd think that in some way, shape, or form, they would try and come to the community. And maybe it's the community that needs to come together and band together and say, it's kind of like, like different oil companies are saying, hey, we're going to set these rules for ourselves. If one of our people kind of goes outside of that circle, like, you can go grab them and, if they're breaking the law. But hey, as long as we're abiding by the things that we think are morally correct, like if you're coming for one of us, you're coming for all of us. And it's like, I think maybe that's a piece that this industry, and it's tough though, because it's so global. We're here in Europe. There's a lot of companies built out of Europe with great products, companies in the US. Talk about Singapore, like Southeast Asia is growing. So I think it's difficult. It's so global. And it's unfortunate that in our country, we're not seeing that. We're not trying to be the innovation leaders, right? And I feel like it's a little lazy on behalf of the government, what's happening.
Yeah, but it's not. But we have elected officials who are out there really fighting for cryptocurrency, digital assets,
right?
And so I think that's a really positive sign, right? That we're not completely alone. It's not like this nascent industry is completely stranded with no representation. There is, but I think that the thing is, again, it's a lack of clarity. And when I say lack of clarity, I mean you can take older case law and you can compare it to modern cryptocurrencies, previous securities law. But the thing is that, like I mentioned, digital assets can transmogrify over time. There's different types of digital assets. You have stable coins, you have crypto commodities, you have crypto securities, you have non-fungible tokens, which are kind of an animal of their own. And now more modern methods of minting tokens on legacy chains, like you mentioned, BRC20s and DRC20s. And I think that, when you look at like what Europe has done with MiCA, that's clearly the direction that the United States needs to go. Canada needs to follow it as well. In my opinion, I think that, limiting people to how much crypto they can buy is very bizarre. You wouldn't, and I heard that joke. You wouldn't stop somebody in Canada from going to the casino and more selling their house or whatever. So and not saying that crypto is gambling. Certainly, people can speculate on assets and make bad decisions. But I think a lot of people that are everybody that I know that's in cryptocurrency for over a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, they're all sitting on crypto. They have wallets. And if you said, hey, can I send you some Bitcoin? They would bust out their wallet, most likely with some Bitcoin in it or some Dogecoin or some Lunar token. And I could pay them and send them some crypto. It's not like people in crypto just buy all their crypto and then sell all their crypto immediately. Some people do, but most people believe in the vision. They actually want to use the technology. So in the early phase, people are going to speculate, just like anything. People are speculating on what AI can do right now. And it's mostly chat plugins and things like that. But give it a few years, and that AI will be running massive factories and all types of stuff. Same thing with blockchain and cryptocurrency. In the future, every bank is going to be connected to a blockchain. Every large technology company will be interacting with blockchains and digital assets, and everything will be open. There's a big push for this, and to come back to AI or that topic, Elon Musk and Twitter, right? That is the new home for news. It's the home for cryptocurrency. And in the future, apparently it's going to do payments as well. Yeah. And I know for a fact that the new X.com is going to be looking at crypto, looking at blockchain. And you've got Elon Musk also talking about open sourcing, the algorithm for Twitter, and now talking about how creators migrate between platforms. Well, how are you going to do that? And you have the ex-CEO of Twitter working on Nostr. He may be, hardcore maxi, but he may be focused on one point, but he's still focused on an open vision. So, that's where we're going to go. We're going to go into this open vision, and it is the digital Pandora's box. You cannot close it. In fact, I've always said governments that ban crypto is a litmus test of corruption. If your government bans crypto, it is corrupt. So, are we going down a path of corruption like China, like Russia, countries that clearly don't have, free speech or freedoms? The Communist Party in China is using this idea of digital identity for great evil. You do something bad, you have a bad social credit score, and they'll paste your face bust to not associate with that person.
I don't need to face anymore either now, by the way. I don't know
yeah,
if you saw that. They can draw your body and your equipment and know it's you without
it's insane. And so cryptocurrency and blockchain is really the antithesis of all of this. It is going to be a free and open system that allows us to beat that. If we allow it to go down that path, then it's a very scary, dark, dystopian world, like the second episode of Black Mirror, for those that have seen it. That's what's happening over there. China is a beautiful country, amazing people, but that government is focused on using this technology in a more centralized way to subvert people and to take away their freedoms. And so with cryptocurrency, I think that this is the ultimate experiment in freedom. And I think in the future, too, people will opt into communities that they'll pay a lot of money and time and energy to be a part of. And it might be a DAO that fixes a pothole in your neighborhood.
Please.
To think about that. But that's where we're going to go in terms of these opt-in, decentralized autonomous organizations and entities. Right now, we're just voting on, protocols for swapping and trading and basic primitives of crypto. But as this stuff expands out, it's going to be the alternative to that dystopian social credit score. It's going to be the open credit score that's all open source and we work on together. And it's not dystopian because we built it.
So I'd love to talk about just the model of what's the right model for an entity to get into crypto. You talked about utility and what constitutes utility and when. And I mean, let's go back to Dogecoin, right? So what was the complaint initially from the utility people out there going, it doesn't do anything. It's just a meme coin. And then you're like, wait a minute, does the community constitute utility? And wait a minute, if you have a community and you have a token that's widely distributed, can you not build successful utility? And so it's sort of there's this model of you could launch no token, no utility. You could have a Twitter account and build a huge community. that all, advocates for the same kind of thing. You could then launch a token, or you could then launch a utility, and then you can launch a token. I mean, so like, what's the right model that you're seeing work? And then I think the other part of this is like, well, what's going to be compliant? What bites you in the ass for doing something the wrong way? What's the wrong way? What's the right way? And I think this is a big question, especially, to the startups out there that might even be listening to this. They're like thinking, I have this application idea. What's the right compliant way to do this? Or just do I not do anything at all?
Yeah, I think the first thing you want to do is get feedback before you do anything. So what might be a good idea to some people is maybe not everyone's idea of a good idea. So a good founder is someone that's solving a problem that's personal, but also good business is a problem that applies to everyone or a lot of people or a lot of organizations. So starting, just general entrepreneurial, stuff, you start with your feedback. And then when if you're doing something in the digital asset space and blockchain and cryptocurrency, is it something that's generally and involved with crypto, or in some cases you will have people entering into the blockchain space? And we saw that, in the last kind of bubble or hype cycle as crypto is becoming, more mainstream, that a lot of things showed up that were projects that didn't solve anything, right? But if you really can solve something with the decentralized ledger, that's the time, to go beyond just the feedback and the research, but to become deeply involved inside of other crypto communities. And the thing about blockchain is it's all about networking and connecting pieces together. So, true blockchain is open source. Smart contracts generally are open source. And so bringing these pieces together so they can interact and work together. So ask yourself, what has already been done in blockchain, and where can I tie that together? Because that's what makes this decentralized network. And then if you are going to launch a blockchain or create a cryptocurrency wallet, a trading platform, some sort of DeFi app or DAO or NFT project, then in my opinion, I think it's always good to form a traditional company to raise some capital that further validates your idea, and then get into the blockchain part. If you come into the blockchain part and you just appear, it generally doesn't leave a good taste with people. And if there's no outside validation, but then also, the partners as well. You want to have partners. So when companies show up to crypto and nobody knows who they are, and they are not connected into any other systems, a red flag always goes up in my mind, because that's questionable. So I always tell entrepreneurs in the crypto space, show up, be a part of the community, and if you have some real valuable concept and idea, after getting that feedback, chances are some people will show up and back you and support you. And uh, you'll find in crypto that things move so quickly that if you're actually onto something, a year later it will be something. And whether it's a company or it's a DAO, people will form around it. It's unlike anything you've ever seen, because in the traditional startup world, you're fighting, all the way to, moving from being a startup to a major company, and then you have a big audience like Apple or something like that. In the crypto world, you start from day one with your sports team, and you have an audience group behind you, and you have people trying to collaborate and be a part of it. So it's totally different than any other startup, because people are showing up and coming in. And one of the spirits of blockchain cryptocurrency is that we are global. So many teams are becoming more and more global. And in the past, a big company may not have a community chat channel or forum. It's very unusual, and usually tends to hire people more through traditional platforms, LinkedIn, whatever. But in the world of crypto, people just show up and commit some open source. They show up on Reddit and are really helpful, and they become the community manager or something like that, or a dev liaison or whatever it might be. So crypto is really like this. It's a very interesting place to be.
Let's talk a little bit more about this, because I think it's such an interesting topic around, like, talk about stifling innovation. There's like, historically there was kind of a way that you would build a business, right? You'd like, hey, I got kind of an idea. Maybe you talk to your friends, and then they maybe try to make that product, right? Maybe somewhere along the lines, if you got people to kind of commit, then you say, hey, let's formulate some documents and let's go file that. Let's be a Delaware C corp, and then you have all these lawyer fees, everything else. Then people like Stripe Atlas, maybe streamline those things a little bit. At some point, though, you've got to go and get venture funding potentially, unless you can build something like grassroots, create kind of bootstrapping that's very rare. It does happen. It's like the speed at which the Facebooks of the world and things like that, and like Zuck owning 50%, very, very rare. Unicorn, very rare thing. Most of the time, cap tables are a little bit more distributed. But then you think about, well, how hard is it even to get started with that? It's like, well, if you're in the US and you've got benefits, right, with your company, and you're like, well, if I quit, I have a family, maybe I'm someone that's got a really good idea. It's like now suddenly my family doesn't have benefits, and now I gotta like moonlight potentially and find someone else to moonlight. It's like very difficult. You have to assume a ton of risk, and so there's not as much. It stifles innovation even to be able to do that. And then like crowdfunding kind of comes along, and this is where it's like a little bit of a rub with what we're talking about. And you walk through like 1,000 different ways that like you have to figure out how to build this. But you see people, hey, I'm gonna create this chair, right? And then all they did was create kind of a 3D image potentially of what that chair looked like, and then they can maybe crowdsource and say, hey, we're gonna deliver 1,000 of these chairs, but you guys have to finance that from the community, right? So then it's kind of like, hey, I'm building a community first. I don't have to build the product yet, but they're assuming and taking some risk on that they can deliver it. And an average everyday person could potentially participate in that. It's not, no offense to, I think it was like Gary Tan, but put $2 million into Coinbase and return, put 300K into Coinbase and return $2 billion. Doesn't seem very distributed and even to me, right? Versus a bunch of people putting in $1,000, maybe getting a new home, making a lot of money. And so then it's, when you think about crypto, you see, hey, I can go out and put my ideas out in the world, see if those are validated by a community, and see if I'm onto something with a very low level of risk, and then I could launch something. But if I go and I start putting these ideas out in the world, here's what I want to build, what I want to do, I get no feedback. It's like, well, maybe I'm going to do something else, right? So you didn't just say, hey, I want to put my own money, I'm going to start a corp in Delaware, I got to get a lawyer, I got to do all of this, then I got to go talk to venture, then I got to go sell a product, and then I fail, and then I didn't have benefits, and I lost 8 months of this time. Granted, you're going to learn a lot, and potentially the next job you have, you might earn a little bit more money. But it feels like this other new system, and we're talking about business formation, right? And yes, that I think is kind of like the rub around why everything's being talked about securities, is because we're at that nascent early stage of like kind of formation and speculation. But as these things mature, and yes, you've got Reddit, you've got Top Shot, you've got all these things, those are going to mature even more, and they're going to look nothing like securities. They're going to look like a DAO or like Links DAO, where it's like people are trying to buy like a golf club, or you're going to see an online membership, or maybe just access to like a Telegram group because people like want to talk about mental health or whatever it is. And it's like, how is that being applied at all to a securities law that's going? So I just think this is an interesting topic to continue on. Of like, there's a million different ways that these things are going to happen, and nothing fits into what historically people just talk about.
And it also doesn't make sense if you start with, oh, well, this has utility, so it's not a security up front. There's just no way. And the other part, it's funny, you walk around here, I've looked up a lot of the companies. You know how you know who's going to make it? When you see that they're posting on multiple social channels multiple times a day, and they have tens of thousands of followers, and they're active, and you see them, they're walking around everywhere, interviewing people, they have live streaming at their booth. Not they have 87 followers. They posted once in the last 3 months.
I always check whenever I'm checking for signs of life of a company. I just go to Twitter, and if you haven't tweeted in 30 days, you're dead.
It's just like if you're not set up as an organization to listen to that community, you're not set up to get the feedback to build the product.
Yeah.
And so, how on earth could you possibly launch a successful token? How on earth could you possibly launch anything on the blockchain that's community supported if you're already from the ground floor, not building that community?
Right.
And it's an interesting thing. I think things used to work this way.
Yeah.
And I think this new world, a lot aren't set up for this. I mean, we even saw this. It was interesting, like totally different topic and totally different thing to give an example of. But like when Silicon Valley Bank went down, right? Like we saw social go nuts, days and days ahead of when it failed. Were they listening? Did they have people internally there ready to listen 24/7?
In fact,
I mean,
I checked their Twitter right before it went bust, and I think they hadn't tweeted in I was like 3 or 4 weeks, and I was like, well, that's
Didn't have to litmus test.
Yeah, that if you haven't tweeted in 3 or 4 weeks, are you all right? You okay there? because or even if it's just not Twitter, but all the platforms, right?
All of them.
Reddit,
Yep.
Facebook, Instagram, Telegram, you name it. If and that's where I think companies are going into the future. The companies will be participants in DAOs, and that will bring companies together. Will make them more global. To your point earlier about how crypto has changed the startup world, when you think about how traditionally you would go down to Sand Hill Road and there was like one place that you could pitch, right? Or you go down here and you pitch, and then this mafia funds you and dings your competition or whatever shady old school way that things used to happen. Now it's very different. You have cryptocurrency entrepreneurs, a new asset class emerging of wealth, stable coins, and I have an investor from the Philippines that came in with stablecoin. That never would have happened without cryptocurrency. That never those connections wouldn't have even have happened because how would I have even met that person? This technology is bringing all of these people together, and in the future, corporations are going to become more and more open. And I also think the technologies are going to start moving more towards the FOSS environment, the free and open source software movement, which was started by Richard Stallman and the Free Software Foundation. And it was a very nerdy thing back in the day. But then you look back to Microsoft buying Red Hat for what was it, $8 billion, and you look at Elon talking about open sourcing, and you see Jack out there doing his thing with Noster, and you see this explosion of cryptocurrency. Right now, it's nascent, it's early. Everybody's fighting for market share, and hasn't really proven the value to the mainstream yet. Everybody knows there's something really big here. It's interesting because when you jump into this space, you can immediately recognize. And I think when you're outside of it right now in 2023, we're still in the very, very early days. But when PayPal talks to MetalPay, talks to Revolut, talks to Coinbase, and we're all moving money through Proton and Metal blockchain, then okay, whoa, things are starting to heat up. And when we're using digital identity to skip past the walled gardens of sign up with Apple ID, and now that digital identity can get a better credit score than I could get on Experian with things that really matter to raise my credit limit of the things that I actually need. That would be pretty crazy. So, but that hasn't been built yet. We're only touching the very beginning of that. And I think it's funny too because people thought, oh, decentralized means no identity. It means no laws or no rules or no regulations. Well, now we're starting to realize as a community in blockchain, crypto, that's just not true. That we have to function with the rules of our country. But at the same time, these rules and the regulation around it needs to evolve. And crypto is kind of like water. You can't stop it. It will burrow right through a rock. If you place that rock in the stream and crypto's the water, it's going to cut a hole right through that rock, right? And it's going to go to Europe. It's going to go to Asia. It's going to go to somewhere else. And so this has been the big message in the U.S. is that we have to keep it here. Unfortunately, some of our elected policymakers and regulators are deciding that they want to push it away. When we push it away, we are going to lose billions and billions and billions of dollars, far more than you could ever imagine if we push it out of the United States.
What's so funny about that is think of, I'm not going to call it specific politicians, but think of when you listen to the ones that are not informed, the ones that haven't done their research. You can just being someone in this space for so long, it's like you just immediately know that they haven't done their research.
Spam ad.
It is. It doesn't make sense. But then listen to the people. I'll call it Cynthia Loomis. Listen to her. Listen to her talk. Right. Completely educated.
You can tell she's actually created a wallet, maybe sent some around her to actually interact with it.
Right? Yeah. But like intelligent, spent cycles thinking about this, and after those cycles, still advocates for it, which is interesting, right? So it's almost like those individuals that try to almost purposely not research it. Those are the ones shooting it down, versus the ones that research it and they're all about it.
Or the people that have researched it, like looking at some of those Gary Gensler videos about Algorand, right? And people have researched it and then come around and are saying this. It's like, is it the goal of the SEC to protect consumers? And Coinbase is going public, and I'm sure that they had to file like this one, and they had to disclose staking on there. Is it like how are we, like, out of all of the things that we could focus on to protect consumers and to give opportunity to consumers, it's like Matic staking on Coinbase for 4% or whatever it is. It's like that's that's what we're focused on.
Well, and the interesting thing about the staking as a service, the differentiator between, what made that a problem versus just opening a non-custodial wallet and staking it is a promise of the staked assets plus the return on the staked assets and being charged a fee, right? So, if you staked Ethereum and you got X percent back and Coinbase took some of that, that might be viewed as some sort of financial product. But, the interesting thing about that to me is that in some ways it's acknowledging that, yes, we should all be non-custodial. We shouldn't, no offense to the staking as a service products, but we should be using this thing the way that it was meant to be used. And that would have been much better. It would have avoided some of these problems. At the same time, I think there's the murky waters that have not made it clear for startups and in a hyper-competitive environment, those staking as a service products launched. Simultaneously, and you guys know this, and we know this, it takes a while to get a product to market. It also takes a while to wind down a product.
Yeah.
So, I think that in terms of where that's going, and I've been saying this for a while. People said I was crazy, 3 years ago when I said we need to integrate banks directly into crypto. They said, "How dare you? How dare you do that?" I said, "Oh, I'm sorry. Do you go to Safeway and pay in Bitcoin yet? No, you don't? Well, then you're going to need Visa and MasterCard, right?
Yeah.
You're going to need access to dollars." And people said that was crazy, but now that's the new narrative. And then the next narrative was that I think, and I said this early on, was that we're actually going to take the decentralized tech and we're going to integrate it into the TradFi world. What makes crypto so powerful is that it gives you self-sovereignty, it gives you true ownership of your funds, it gives you the capability to really take control. Everything else in this world is pretty much an IOU when it comes to finance, right? And that is the big innovation. And also, it creates a trustless environment where two individuals don't have to trust each other, two corporations don't have to trust each other, and that's what Bitcoin initially solved, which is the Byzantine generals' fault tolerance problem, which is the history of the two war generals have to send a spy through the village, but they want to make sure that the spy doesn't get corrupted by the army inside the village to send the wrong message to the other side. And now that we've solved that problem, and I think that the rest of the world doesn't realize how huge of a breakthrough that is. Now companies don't have to trust each other, and and individuals don't have to trust each other where they didn't before in a digital environment. Cryptocurrency literally and CBDC is going to eliminate counterfeit money. That's incredible. Counterfeit money has been a problem since the dawn of money. And so as this stuff starts to change, I do think it's going to empower people, but we're going to, another big prediction I'll make. So decentralization going into the regulated world going to the decentralized world. People used to say I was crazy to have KYC on the DEX. We'll watch every DEX get KYC. I'm calling it right now, and I know I'm right, and it's going to happen. So anybody can poo-poo me online and just tweet. We'll do the remind me tweet thing in 5 years, and you'll see. But it's going to make it better. It's going to make these systems are going to really evolve. And I do think that over the next few years, we're going to see certain countries really win and certain countries really lose. And the countries that are really going to lose are going to reject blockchain. And it's going to become so evident how corrupt these governments are because they're going to want you to give you the bad CBDC. So if everyone thought CBDC only comes in one flavor, but in my opinion, I think it comes in multiple flavors. And there's the bad CBDC, which is the CCP CBDC. That's the one that really surveils you and shuts off when you don't do something that the CCP likes. And then there's, what looks like the direction that Europe is going with MiCA, a CBDC that maybe could be more beneficial. Maybe you could access the ability to access bonds or other financial products that you used to have to go into the bank and talk to a banker, and now it's part of a decentralized ledger with the central bank of the European Central Bank, right? And maybe those capabilities can be more helpful to business when it comes to loans and things like that. So the good CBDC and the bad CBDC. And I know there are people out there that will say, no, there's only bad CBDC, but that's like saying there can be no good countries in the world, there can be no good government. And I think that while governments do attract corruption because it's a natural magnet for bad guys to come in and try to abuse the power, you do have good people out there too. And I want to see it happen in America. And I think it's happening. I think we're headed in that direction in Europe. But good CBDC, bad CBDC, and countries that ban Bitcoin and ban cryptocurrency, or how much you can buy and sell, is a total litmus test of the corruption index, in my opinion. Somebody should make we should have a Lunar Crush feature, global corruption index ranked by how much you banned cryptocurrency. Probably, and I bet it would match up perfectly with how corrupt you think the countries are.
Yeah, I want to come back to your KYC comment, because I agree with you, but I'm also unsure of the future. Like, for example, when we talk about KYCing someone, you're talking about identifying them.
Yeah.
You're talking about identity.
Yeah.
We're talking about blockchains and cryptocurrencies that transcend all borders. So when you talk about KYC, you're talking about centralized database identification. You're talking about like one country potentially at a time. How do we work in this new environment where this is global, and where does identity play on a blockchain versus on a centralized ledger? How does that all come to play?
So people question me on this and say, well, you'll always have some open version because somebody will always fork it and throw some website up that could access the Uniswap smart contract or something like that, right? And in my opinion, we're probably like, I don't know, 20 or 30 years away from a point. Not maybe that's forever, but maybe 10 years away from a point where bring your own front end, compile your own front end can be something that everyone could do, right? So now, and if you could compile your own front end, then we could truly have full decentralization. But at the end of the day, a decentralized application needs a core development team, most likely, but then also needs people to host it on the front end. And in the traditional financial services world, you can't open a bank account without an identity. You can't do things in the financial world without identifying yourself for the reasons of anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism, things like that. And so I do believe that the Western world, it's kind of a lot of it's happening here. You're also seeing in Asia, Singapore, there's more aggressive regulation, and then some places where it's not really happening. But ultimately, I do think that all the policies around traditional finance will spill over to cryptocurrency, because eventually cryptocurrency will be considered part of traditional finance. But right now, it's considered kind of like an edge. And maybe some of those forms of identity in the bring your own front end world are less focused around, what's your first name and last name, and more focused around what are the chances that you create MEV on this chain or other things like that. So I think that what you're going to see we're going to start to see more forms of digital identity. And my big prediction is that some of these open standards will win out, and it will start to create a more borderless world, because that digital identity it doesn't have to be a passport in your hand. It can be a digital identity, a key that's stamped by the US government, stamped by the EU government. Maybe you're a dual citizen, but I think that we're going to start to break out into these more open systems, because, government doesn't always do the best job at building their own technology either. I mean, maybe it's military technology, but like if you go to the post office in the United States, it's pretty antiquated. DMV, pretty antiquated. It's getting better, but when I look at like the DMV, the Department of Transportation, look what Apple's done with the new Apple Wallet in Colorado and Arizona. You can put your driver's license in your Apple Wallet, and I think that's an example of that innovation. The next step is that identity going outside of the Apple ID into the open world. And I would bet dollars to donuts that Apple in 10 years from now will be using decentralized ledger as well to interact with that.
There's also levels of KYC based on how much you want to interact, right? It's the same thing as saying there's probably a lot more paperwork you need to do when you purchase a home or purchase a car. There's a lot more information that you might have to give around your assets and can you pay these loans back. And like at the same time, you realize that you're just giving up your entire identity if you want to. And giving up, I guess, is a bad thing. You have to identify yourself, identify the assets that you have, because someone's loaning you a lot of capital to purchase a home. right? And so there's different layers of that versus, hey, if I want to just get to this bar and I need to be 21 years old, maybe just there's a green light that flashes and it shows my picture versus, hey, here's my address, here's where I live. That's just another individual at another business that's seeing that private information. And as we've learned with Twitter hacks and other things that happen, those are just social hacks, social engineering that happens. It's not someone saying breaking like SHA-256, right? It's someone saying like, hey, I hacked someone's phone, I sent them a link, and that person has credentials to get into Twitter admin, right? And so I think that there's layers of that. I think I can appreciate that of saying, hey, if I want to interface with this specific front end, this wallet, then yes, I'm going to need to KYC in a manner that allows me access to this pool of tools over here. And maybe there's stuff that I don't need as much information access. These other pools of interaction or utility over here, like maybe I don't need to give all of my information if I want to own a Bored Ape, right? But if I want to buy a house, I have to. If I want to fly, I have to.
But even the most basic thing, like what about just proving that you're not a robot? It doesn't even. What if we're not even care about your age or your height or eye color or anything? It's just the most basic thing. Like I want to whitelist you for an NFT drop, and I need to make sure that these aren't bots.
There was a project yesterday that was the BRC20 that launched. It was this sexy new BRC20 project.
All bots.
All bots. Like, I mean, seriously. So this one person ended up with a huge amount of the token.
Yeah.
Like,
and it ruins projects, and and that's a big thing in the NFT world, right? And in general, I think as we move forward into crypto and DAOs, that's going to be the big problem in DAOs. It already has been. How do I know it's a real company? How do I know that these two block producers or validators are not the same entity trying to collude and take over the network or something like that? So I think that this is going to become more and more important, and I think that you'll see the more kind of digital identities that are focused on like fiat, traditional financial services, government services, and then digital identity that your little frog.eth or whatever, and there is no anything attached to your physical appearance or your real world, but it has other stuff like how quickly do you buy and sell the NFT, how long do you hold on to it, other things that all types of things in the crypto world around digital identity. It's not just your first name, last name, date of birth. It's going to be all types of stuff, and I think there's going to be the old school crypto world that's going to hold off as long as they can on attaching real names to stuff. But then I think there's also going to be people that are going to embrace it. And as the technology gets better, the idea, like what you were just saying, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. You don't have to give up all your identity. And like when you use like Facebook social graph, you can choose like, oh, I want to give my phone number, my email, or something like that. But that's one of the things that cryptography is really good at, is that you can sign certain messages or certain things that you want to expose and encrypt other things that you don't want to expose, while verifying that you're the key holder, the original owner. So
you bring up a good point here around, imagine you find a liquidity pool somewhere and it's yielding something, and you're in one of your Web3 wallets and you want to apply liquidity because you want to get some return, and you're just on some other random front end, some website per se that you don't know. And think about it in your mind, if you're having a hard time saying like clicking yes to send, like imagine JP Morgan. Like, do you think if you're having a hard time with like your $100 saying like, I don't know if I want to send it to over there, like, are they going to do that with $1 billion? Right. So it's like, there are like, identity is important. You learn this at some point in your life. It's when people are anonymous, it's kind of like when people drive in their cars. It's like, why are there so many more angry drivers? It's like someone that might have been like the nicest person on the planet at work, and then suddenly like they're flicking people off in the car. Like I forget what it's called, but basically it's when people are anonymous, they act differently.
The keyboard warrior.
Yeah, they act a little bit different when they're anonymous, and it's okay if you're going to be out there and you're going to do satire, you're going to say some funny stuff, and maybe you're like, I just don't want the backlash. Like, I'll create this kind of persona online. That's fine. But when you're driving a car, you're dealing with maybe hundreds of millions of dollars at your bank. There's certain levels of things that it's good to know who these people are that you're interacting with.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I think that's what we've had a hard time with in this space, is figuring out where that line is. How do you delineate between, like just someone that wants to have fun and learn a little bit and buy NFTs, and how do we actually kind of rebuild a better infrastructure and financial infrastructure that's more fair and more even and more open?
Yeah, and digital identity doesn't have to be, like I said earlier, it doesn't have to be, there are many different forms of digital identity that are going to emerge. Some of those digital identities are going to be not your first name, last name, date of birth. And then on the flip side of that, some of those things will be the most, intense credentials, like what you're mentioning. And you want maybe, in the world of decentralized ledger, you want to be able to certain people sign off on things. I think, when it comes to accountability in government and when it comes to like political donations and things, I'd love to see, where the money is coming from and going to and who's signing off on stuff. I think that would actually clean up our system very well. And so, you got to wonder why some of these people are fighting it so hard. Do they have anything to hide? They might.
Right. Imagine transparent voting.
They might.
Imagine,
Like,
imagine on the bottom of the commercial, it's like it says like funded by, then it's some ridiculous name like Freedom Fighter Eagle LLC, and then it's like it's the most liberal organization. Like they pick names, and like the other side will think that
Nancy Pelosi, she's like an amazing stock trader, like the best of all time. It's just uncanny.
So I'm gonna get some alpha on that. So one of the things we're gonna be moving into is, you'll be able to track Nancy Pelosi right on Lunar Crush
nice.
and what stocks she has
She never
influence over.
loses.
So
Yeah.
right,
It's almost
down
like
to the
reverse
assets.
Kramer. It's so accurate.
So I'm kind of smirking over here, going like, you had a quote. You said, "If your government bans crypto, it is corrupt."
Yes.
Right?
Stand by that.
And then I'm also reading one of the top trending things from yesterday. SEC seeks temporary restraining order to freeze Binance US assets. The user's assets.
Yeah.
Can't lock them in. How is this protecting people?
Well, so I think that there were things that happened here that were very clear that Binance violated certain laws, and like let's just move away, I guess, from the thing that's the most contentious, which is the securities debate, and just focus on some of the other things that were in the original CFTC complaint. And these are things around anti-money laundering. These things are around customer identification. If .us was separate from .com, why are people from the US going over to .com? And if that's really happening as alleged, then that's a really big problem. Just stepping away from the issue that we're talking about today, where everybody's talking about the security stuff, that is a really big problem, and I can see why that could become a matter of national security and money laundering. And I have been saying, for a while, that the space is going to start to really evolve and clean up and start to move beyond its early Wild West days. And so if you look at the early Wild West days of Mt. Gox and BTCE and some of these early things that exploded, and then we kept evolving and evolving. Coinbase and Kraken have been, rocks. Metallicus has been a rock out here. But then there have been some of these things like FTX that almost disappeared as quickly as they appeared and simultaneously got huge, and it was like a massive flash in the pan. And then some other things like Binance that grew massively, but they really made some big mistakes around the compliance side and the regulation side. Not just on the securities issue that I think is the most contentious. Some of these things are pretty black and white. And so, when it comes to the freezing of the assets, I'm not entirely surprised. If the North Korean hacker money was flowing through this thing, then that makes a lot of sense, and that they need to sort through that. When I look at like Celsius and Voyager and like what happened there, right? Because those assets got frozen, right? FTX got frozen. I'm a Mt. Gox creditor, by the way, so I'm waiting. I'm not selling. I'm hodling. I did pretty well. I got a small amount for 4, but because I thought Mt. Gox would come back, but 10 years later, joke's on me. Force total though, pretty cool.
Nice.
Yeah, force total.
Best
good
strategy
feature.
ever, right?
Best feature of Mt. Gox was the force total.
That's funny.
And I think that we're going to see an evolution of the space. It's going to improve on the seized assets. Is it being seized for the securities issue, or is it being seized for the money laundering issue? Now, in my opinion, if it's the money laundering issue, I totally understand why they're freezing it. If it's the securities issue, though, that is a little different. I think that customers should be able to withdraw their assets as non-custodial asset and take them where they want, right, and own them. In fact, they should be owning them in non-custodial ways if you can. So I think it's pretty wrong, to say, well, we haven't properly classified this asset, so it's mine now, and then you won't get all of it back.
Right.
That's wrong. If it was involved in some sort of crime, and you could say, well, supposedly the unregistered exchange was a crime, but these are sovereign currencies. People own these things. They should have access to their money. It seems a little. It doesn't really feel like protecting the people, does it? Like taking that away. So I'm not entirely surprised this happened, but for different reasons.
I mean, and this is a question for both of you. It's like, okay, so here we are. Maybe there's some corporate issues going on, but the SEC is showing that they just have no appetite to understand or manage this space. Which entity should be overseeing crypto? And maybe that's not necessarily just a U.S. question, but like, what part of governments should create those regulations for crypto? Are they? Whose responsibility is it?
Yeah, I helped co-author a bill that made its way to Congress. Didn't get voted, didn't get to the floor, but it's called the Cryptocurrency Act 2020. And in that bill was the idea of breaking out digital assets into three classifications: commodities, currencies, and securities. Commodities like Bitcoin, right? Like Ethereum, like Dogecoin. Tokens and coins with utility and decentralization that are not either securities nor currencies. They're commodities. They're free floating in value. People can use them like a commodity currency, but they tend to be more of something that you would take this commodity and then you can use it for something. Gold can be speculated on, but it's also used in manufacturing of tons of chips and all types of industrial manufacturing. In the same way that Ethereum can be used in all types of smart contracts for gas, and other blockchains can also be used for resources on those blockchains or inside of those DAOs. That's a commodity, and under the commodity as a commodity, I believe it should be regulated by the CFTC and the Department of Agriculture. And traditionally, the CFTC has only regulated futures markets, but it's my opinion that the CFTC should be regulating digital asset spot markets, or the Department of Agriculture. And that's kind of a new and novel idea, but I think that that's where it firmly belongs. Now, cryptocurrencies, we were talking about this earlier. Why is everything called a cryptocurrency? I think that's wrong. But it's just what stuck because
Right.
it just rolled off the tongue so nicely. And also people could understand it better. When you said the word currency, they think money, they think dollars. But cryptocurrencies, as I defined it in the Cryptocurrency Act 2020, are fiat currencies, stable coins. So fiat currencies, tokenized fiat currencies, central bank digital currencies, private stable coins like USDC, and synthetic algorithmic stable coins like DAI. And in that bill, there was actually an exemption that stable coins that are synthetic could still be considered cryptocurrencies, but would be regulated by the SEC because the underlying backing is a real future promise of value or something. But I still think that they should still be able to be used as currencies, but there should be some regulator that's kind of making sure that the UST doesn't, that it's not the emperor wears no clothes. And I think UST is a good example of where we could have used that enforcement earlier on to stop a big explosion. Everybody agrees with that now. And then on the cryptocurrency side, that should be FinCEN, that should be Department of Treasury, everybody and Secret Service, everybody that's involved in and around fiat currencies and monitoring those currencies. That's where it should belong. And then on crypto securities, you have tokenized stocks, you have investment contracts, you have things like that. I think that saying that all of these things are the same is the equivalent of saying everything on the road is a car. A motorcycle is a car, a truck is a car, a three-wheeler is a car. But do you not
My
need
14-month-old does that though. She thinks everything's a car.
Well, yeah.
So she's 14 months old.
Yeah, so that's kind of what we got going on. We have the the infant mindset.
Yeah, I'm a
and
14-month-old.
yeah, it's the 14-month-old mindset, and that makes sense because in cryptocurrency, I always say 1 = 10. So
Yeah.
it's a new topic for regulators, and it's not like the regulators don't know what's going on. They're smart, they're informed, but then you do have these political agendas on either side, and you have the agenda of freedom and the direction that I want to see America go, and Europe go, and the world go, and then you have the direction of tyranny, and you don't own anything, and you'll eat sea bugs and go into the pod, and all of the joking the left conspiracies, but you know what I mean. Like it's the weird dystopian 1984 world with thought crime and all this crazy stuff. That's where I don't want to go, and I think that cryptocurrency will prevent the 1984 world because it's going to really open up the freedom and access of uh, uh, finance, of information, of identity. You look at like what BitTorrent did, right? And people don't really think about how important BitTorrent was for the evolution of the internet. But in the beginning of the internet, everything is centralized servers, and download times are slow. Because if I need to download something, I got to go and hit this one server, and if the download gets interrupted, I got to start from the beginning. But BitTorrent was the beginning of the free open data web, where when I want to go download something, I don't just go to one source. It's broken up from A to Z, and whoever has the fastest chunk of that file or block is coming to me first. And this decentralized system actually became 80% of all web traffic, 2007, 2008, pre-Bitcoin. BitTorrent was the rise of Netflix, Spotify, of Hulu, and Amazon. For those of us that were, 90s kids and Napster and stuff like that, we were downloading, we were on LimeWire. In fact, LimeWire is now a crypto company because they know that demographic relates to this decentralized world. So that's what's going to happen with blockchain. It's gonna free up and open up access to information, cryptographic proofs. You look at like how Twitter is becoming the news source for news. When I go on Twitter, I find news like what's happening. You still have to verify because there's a lot of fake tweets and things like that. When digital identity and crypto starts to come in, you think about like the Twitter notes. Imagine that with cryptographic proofs and digital identity. Whoa! Pretty soon you won't really be able to do fake chill tweets anymore because everything will be some form of more open. I'm guessing. I mean, I could be wrong. Probably some open form of notes that Elon makes it open and then it integrates into some blockchain, hashes into the Dogecoin blockchain. Boom! You can't fake it anymore. You can't spoof it.
So interesting because who would be the one to say that take one day this cryptocurrency is determined to have no utility, and then third party like Twitter implements it.
Right.
So now does that cryptocurrency have utility, even though that entity behind the cryptocurrency didn't build it? It's quite a discussion. It's like, well, wait, technically all could have utility depending on who adopts it.
Exactly. I think that that's the thing, that decentralization happens over time, happens through community, it happens through many different factors. But something that Dogecoin is a great example. It was a cryptocurrency that was started as a joke and rapidly grew to popularity. Bitcoin was initially supposed to be the payment system, and it turned out it was actually more of a store of value in the crypto world. And people aren't buying cups of coffee, but they are putting savings into it or something like that. Well, then Dogecoin was the fun and friendly place to learn. It was the place to learn where here's one Doge, and at one time that was so small that you could just give a million Doge out and it was $20, but now a million Doge is $70,000 or whatever.
I almost hate that it's in a category called memes, or that
Dogecoin is not a meme point,
but
it is a meme.
Or a joke, or what's interesting what Doge did was it introduced to the masses a new model.
Yeah,
and at first, think of how dismissive everyone had. They still are. But it's a new model that puts the community first.
Yeah,
and it's like, wait a second, there's something here. Because go back to the old way. No one did that. No one did that. They built a product and threw it out.
Right.
It's wild.
Yeah, and I think as time goes on, we're going to see more and more adoption of things that may seem you might have something like a smaller blockchain, Proton, for example. Starts simply. It's a small ecosystem, and then some big event happens. Binance collapses. People realize they don't want to plug into centralized APIs anymore because they go down, funds are stolen, things like that, and we move into a fully Proton DEX world or something, and then something that was once really tiny explodes, right? And we've seen this happen time and time again. So you really can't judge anything by saying And same thing with Lunar. When Lunar started, when I first were watching you guys, I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And then completely outside of that, I'm seeing people post Lunar, what's the alt rank, whatever. And then when you guys launch the program of, with Lunar token in the DAO, and you start creating utility around Lunar, being able to access higher parts, to go to tier 4, upgrade your tiers. Then I see people start using it as payment. I start seeing people talk about it. It's no longer just this. It's no longer just this small group of people that are looking at this thing like it could be something. It's now actually happening. And you flash forward a few years, people being using Lunar for other things completely, left field, but it ties into that. And I can see even your data as blockchains evolve, ingesting that data and being part of the smart contracts and DAO. So the world won't decentralize overnight. Rome wasn't built in a day, and the stance that we just have to fit everything into this narrow box, it's completely wrong. Here at Money 2020, I remember coming to the first event. It was only anti-fraud. Everything on the floor was anti-fraud, and I told one of the co-founders, in the next few years, this will be all crypto. And I've watched as this event has gone from purely anti-fraud and identity partners to banking as a service, reg tech, but most importantly, in my mind, it's, I don't know, what do you say, 30%, 40%, 30% crypto solid.
A lot. Crypto.
Yeah, so it's
Great companies too.
Yeah.
And smart people, a lot of startups as well. I see a lot of people walking around with a little CEO tag, and you see it's probably like a 5 or 10 person shop, but that's innovation, and that's happening. I mean, you talked a little bit about all the different like regulatory bodies in the United States and some of the things that might need to happen. We're here in Europe, we're here in Amsterdam, and it's good to have competition also between these countries, right?
Yes.
And you see El Salvador adopting Bitcoin, you see places like Portugal or Singapore be more crypto friendly and create some framework around how to do things, even places like Dubai helping, because they're saying, hey, how do we stay competitive? And how do we bring innovation? And how do we bring some capitalism to our country so that we can grow? And so it's like the US as an incumbent, sure, there's more things potentially to protect, and there's this awesome, huge brand that's been built over the years around innovation. But that being said, like you're saying, just like how Proton can grow or Lunar can grow so quickly, these other things could grow quickly. And where do you start to kind of stifle innovation off where the 25-year-old that's going to start their new business says, I'm going over there, right? And that's actually something that I feel like regulators need to be looking at, which 10, 15 years ago, you would have said, that's crazy. I'm going to Silicon Valley. I'm starting my business. That's how BD is done. Now it's just changing, and it's changing. It could change so quickly that they can't catch up, right? And it just goes offshore. And that's where I think a lot of us are yelling, saying it could go fast. You're not just like they don't know how the cloud works or how crypto works. They also don't know how growth works now and how the total addressable market of a startup that comes into Web3 instantly is everyone that's on the internet, right? Where before it might have been like, hey, I start Uber and I have a 7-by-7 mile area and that's my market to start, right? And so I think it's changing and people aren't paying enough attention, and it's going to fly right underneath the radar.
right. And cryptocurrency, organizations, individuals can show up and just be a part of it. That never existed before. And so it's a complete, and I would say over these past few years, we've entered kind of a little bit of a bizarro world, right? And in many ways, it does feel like that. When I look at San Francisco, when I first showed up there in 2007, what that city was then to today, it's a shame. Things have fallen apart. And in the post-COVID world, what happened? We were told paper cash was dirty. It's going to transmit the virus. Turns out a lot of that was a lie or whatever, but it actually didn't stop us from just being, you know what, screw it. I didn't want paper money anymore. I just want Apple Pay everything and crypto everything. I don't even carry cash anymore. And then there was this exodus of startups from the Valley to all over the U.S. and then globally. And how is this phenomenon of tech, the globalization of tech and startups, going to really grow? It's going to grow when one person sends a wire to pay a person in another country, doesn't need to send a wire anymore and have it held up by a correspondent bank and wait 3 weeks to get their payment versus right now. Something that we just launched recently in Metallicus is streaming payments. The ability that you could get paid as a contractor with cryptocurrency by the second versus a biweekly paycheck, and you could harvest your paycheck like farming rewards. That's crazy, right?
Cool.
So that's where we're going. It's and people said the Web3. I hate the term Web3. Okay, maybe that's a marketing buzzword, but I do really like it because when I think about Web2 or I think about the earlier iterations of the web, it really was, you've got mail, you want to surf the web? What's your AOL keyword, right? You were really in a
CD
box.
in the mail. Remember the AOL CD?
Oh yeah, I used to as a kid. You get all those CDs. I would
Yep.
sign up for as many free trials to cancel. They really don't want you to cancel,
Yep.
But I would cancel every time.
Yep. That's how it works.
All right. Well, we did what, 90 minutes here? More than 90 minutes. Marshall, man.
Nice.
It's always,
Hey, thanks
always
for
a
having me
pleasure.
on. Thanks
Money
for having me on,
Money
guys. Yeah.
Yeah, man. It's been
Are we
great.
off?
No,
still on air?
we're still hanging out a little bit longer. But no, man.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks everyone for listening, and hopefully we'll see you next time when the internet stops working here and we eventually